The first place that the oil goes after it leaves the oil pump is it travels along this gallery here in the engine block to the oil filter. So immediately from the pump, the oil goes to the oil filter, and the oil comes out through this hole into the body of the oil filter itself, and then in through this threaded pipe here and into the main oil gallery on the engine. So this is the old oil filter from this engine. It screws on there. This is a spin-on type oil filter, which is the most common type at the moment. Let's cut this open and see what's happening inside. So we've cut through the oil filter there, and we can see that what we have, the outside is really just a housing and a method of fixing this onto the engine block. Then on the inside we have a filter element here, which the oil makes its way from the outside of this filter to the inside and then into the engine block. And so on the outside here, this is fairly grimy, and this is not just small dirt, this feels like sand between my fingers here. So we can tell this oil filter has filtered all these little particles of metal and dirt and sand and prevented that from getting into the bearings of the engine, because really the filter is the last thing standing between dirt and grime and the internals of the engine. Just going to give this a good clean, and then we'll take a look at the internals on the bench. Here is our oil filter section so we can see the internals. So what we can see is we have a housing, a metal housing, which screws onto the engine block. Then inside there we have this filter element, which is basically just like an air filter. It's a paper filter or a canvas filter of some sort, which has filtered out all the gunk. And the oil flows from the outside of this filter through into the inside here, and from the inside it comes into the engine block. There's actually more going on inside the filter than you would think. We have two valves inside the filter to manage the flow of oil. The first is a bypass valve. So if we take a look at our filter element here, the oil that's being forced through here is on the outside, and that's making its way through this filter element to the inside. And if the filter becomes completely blocked, then no oil will be able to get through the filter and circulate around the engine, which is a condition that we definitely don't want. So although we want clean filtered oil for the engine, no oil is the worst case scenario. It's something we absolutely don't want. So if the filter becomes blocked, then we have a bypass valve so that the pressure becomes so great around the outside of this filter, it will open a small valve here, which is held closed with a spring, will force that valve open and simply bypass the filter and circulate straight to the engine. So there's the bypass valve. We also have an anti-drain back valve. The purpose of that is when we turn off the engine, we don't want all the oil in the filter and in the system to drain back all the way down to the pump. We want the oil to remain where it is, really. So what we have is a rubber sealing gasket here, which sits over the holes, the inlet holes. So if we look around the entrance here, we have 6 inlet holes through which the oil passes, and those are sealed with this rubber gasket on the inside, which is held closed by the filter element itself. And then behind the filter element was a spring. Unfortunately, I've ground my way through that spring, so that was a spring, and that spring sat here holding the filter element against the inlet here. And as the pressure in the engine, as the pump delivers pressurized oil here, it forces the filter element up, opens up that rubber gasket, and the oil can make its way around the outside of the filter. The only other thing to say really about filters is that lately there's been a trend back towards the original style of filter, which was a cartridge type element filter, where you replace only the filter element and not the housing and the rest, because clearly there's a lot of waste here when we take this. The metal housing is perfectly serviceable, all the rubber gaskets, the springs, the valves and so on are all perfectly serviceable, but we throw these in the bin. So over the last few years there's been a trend back towards these cartridge elements because they reduce waste. They're a bit more environmentally friendly.